with other peers, kind of failed. So therefore, this kind of created the avenue for the studio system to kind of rise up and take over, and they're still around, okay? And it's really important to kind of understand that that the Hollywood system, studio system, isn't the only organization that puts out, or company that puts out movies. Well, who else puts out movies besides the studio
Bollywood.
system? Bollywood, of course, the competition of the world, but then also the regular production companies, okay? The difference between the studio system and other production companies is that the studio systems have very deep pockets. We're talking about not just 1 million, not just 100 million, not 200 million. We're talking about maybe $300, $400, $500 million per movie they're able to invest, okay? So this, just on one movie, obviously they try to, put out at least a dozen movies a year, and they're hoping that one of them or a couple of them would be a big hit.
Yeah.
But if one fails, of course they've lost millions of dollars. But they're hoping that they will be able to recoup with the other movies. So this is the financial strategy that they took. Remember, we think of it as consumers of something nice to watch, and it's adorable that they're able to do this sort of service for us. But no, on their part, they're there to make money. Period. Okay. All right. So we're going to be covering 1930 to 45. And before we do that, let's talk about the U.S. economy during that time. It nearly collapsed. Okay, there was a deep depression. Those are, history buffs can understand during this time. Life really changed here in the U.S. Okay, unemployment is 23.6. Okay, what's the unemployment these days? It's gone up a little, but how much is it? I know when Trump was around, he had it down at 6 or
6%.
yeah, so it's gone up a little, but I mean, so that's a major difference between 23 and what it is now. The stock market, of course, hit the lowest point as well. Okay, 1938 was getting better. Okay, and they're gradually getting out of the depression. Okay, so what helped a lot was that the U.S. was selling arms. Of course, this is a sort of, I don't know, conspiracy sort of theory. The reason why some people like to push war because to make money, and there could be some truth to that, but it did help our economy during that time. So 30% of the gross national product was due to the war efforts. So that helped, us out a lot. Now let's talk about the big five studio systems: Paramount, MGM, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and then RKO. Okay, you know RKO is not around anymore. They were also a big studio system back then. We're going to start with Paramount. This is their little logo back then. This is a little more modern. So Paramount declared bankruptcy in 1933 because they owed money to theater chains. Because they had, remember, during that time, some of these filmmakers and studio execs had invested on theaters. Okay. Also, the Paramount pictures were also known for their European style of production. Okay. And many of their European filmmakers immigrated from Europe. This is also really important during this time. They heavily depend on the radio and vaudeville comedians. So they're already veteran actors. They're already performers, and they kind of recruited them from that sort of business. Okay, and these are some of the actors. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with any of them. Maybe your parents are. We'll talk about Mae West a little, Bing Crosby, Mars Brothers, they're popular. Okay. Ten Commandments was one of those big epic type of movies. Okay, it was made in 1956. Even if you watch it today, it seemed kind of interesting because of the quality of the picture. Okay. This may be on the quiz. Hint. The release of Paramount's She Done Him Wrong, starring Mae West, in 1933 was ill-timed because the Democrat administration has just taken over the presidency. Okay. Why is this important? Because prior to that, Will Hayes' influence in Washington was try to help the Hollywood industry by having these sort of regulations. The last thing the industry wanted was that the government would come in and regulate the industry. So this way it kind of helped out just to kind of be at ease with the situation. This is Mae West, and during this time, this is a scandalous sort of picture, but today, of course, it's nothing. Mae West, she was a very successful Broadway performer. The MPPDA, do you guys remember who they were? Because they were also very important. The MPPDA was the Motion Picture Producers Directors Distributors Association. Okay, and they helped out in creating a positive image, okay, for Hollywood. Okay, so they were very useful. So they're fighting against her because she kind of brought down the image of Hollywood in a negative way. So that was the issue there. Paramount was facing bankruptcy, and so they hired her to kind of generate more money. Okay, and she had a really kind of interesting sort of personality. She had this kind of a drawl that made her a little more sexier, I guess. Okay, and her famous quote was, haven't you ever met a man that could make you happy? Okay, so, I don't know,
that was corny.
Yeah. MGM, back then it started off with Lowe's Incorporated, then MGM, and then what it is now, okay, with the Roaring Lion. Okay, MGM immigrated from bankruptcy in 1910, emerged, and dominated the picture industry and was most profitable. They, in one sense, kind of focused mostly on the B films, okay, and these are film noirs, okay, and there are many of those type of films you may have never heard, but they're great. They're film noirs, they're black and white, and they kind of focus on that because it was a lot cheaper to make them versus having big name actors in them, okay, and these are some of the stars that they created, okay, and they were known for having more stars than heaven, okay. These are some of them. Fox Film eventually became 20th Century Fox, okay. They expanded after the sound. They were worse shaped than other majors, okay. They merged with 20th Century, and then it became 20th Century Fox. Okay, and these are some of their stars. Will Rogers, I don't know if you heard of Will Rogers. Shirley Temple, she was a young girl dancing, and so on. This is her, Betty Grable. Scandalous, sorry. Warner Brothers Pictures, this is an old icon, and this is the newer one. Warner Brothers borrowed and expanded before the Depression. They didn't declare bankruptcy, but sold off some of their holdings and cut costs. Okay. They've also made B movies with modest profits. In total assets, it was as big as MGM, but the sets were smaller. They had fewer actors, but they worked on more films. So they worked, when you're contracted with Warner Brothers, you had them for a year, and they would try to work you to death. Okay, so that was just the way it was back then. Okay, so if the studio system had maybe 10 different movies, and if they can squeeze you into doing all 10, they will. Okay, because that's part of the contract. These days, of course, it's a little different. A lot of times when A-list actors, when they have a contract with the studio system, it's only for one specific movie, not unless it's also part of a contract, but for the most part, it's always per film. Okay. These are some of the Warner Brothers stars. Okay, let's see yeah, I don't know if you heard of Humphrey Bogart. He made quite a few film noir movies, kind of Casablanca. I don't know if you heard of Casablanca. He's one of the stars there. Betty Davis, another one, popular actor back then. Okay, RKO, Radio Keith Ophiam. RKO, of course, lived a short life. Okay, the RCA sound system was not adapted, so they went into business, movie business, as an RKO. Okay, what the thing with them is that they lack big stars. Okay. They're the one who made King Kong in 1930. I don't know if you've ever seen the original King Kong. Okay. And then, of course, Citizen Kane, another classic. I was hoping maybe to watch that instead of Gone with the Wind. We can watch Citizen Kane. I thought Gone with the Wind was a little more interesting, but Citizen Kane is one of those movies that it's kind of required for going to film schools. Okay. RKO stayed afloat in the late 1930s due to its distribution of Walt Disney's animated films. And a lot of times, Studio Systems did that. Okay, they kind of work with one another. So if a studio system know that you had a really wonderful set, let's say you're going to be shooting out Big Bear, and you have a whole set there with ski lifts and everything, and you build that for this particular movie. Another studio system say, hey, can I borrow that after you're done for maybe a month or so we can shoot this film? And they would negotiate and barter something. So that's what a lot of times they did. Sometimes you would think that they're fierce enemies, and in some sense they are, but in another sense they're there also to help one another, and they would barter this way. Now, of course, we had the 5 studio systems, and these are the little 3, okay? Universal, Columbia, and United Artists. Of course, things have changed. Some of these little 3s ends up being big, and vice versa with the other 5, okay? Universal Pictures, this is the most recent icon, and they've gone through a lot of corporations that bought them out, okay? It was bought by some French company for a while, and then another company from a different country, and so on, okay? They had extensive distribution system, okay, but they had money problems. Their target sort of focus was mostly on small towns, okay? And they promoted new stars, so they created new stars, okay, and horror films. That was their specialty, their genre, okay? They made a lot of those B film series with Sherlock Holmes, okay? So any of those original Sherlock Holmes movies, they're made by Universal Studios, okay? They had a few major stars. Let's see, I don't know if you, Abbott and Costello, those comedians, have you ever heard of them? Who's on First? Remember that one?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah, they were mostly in Universal Pictures. Okay, Columbia, okay, remained profitable during the Depression. Despite low budget, they produced popular films by borrowing stars and directors from bigger studios. So again, as I mentioned earlier, they would barter. They would say, hey, you can use my studio as long as you want to lend me this big star that you have on contract, and do that. So they were really smart in being able to not have to expend so much money on the stars. Okay, so they would avoid the cost of contracting actors. Okay, and again, they produced B westerns, the Three Stooges, and a lot of these sort of cheap movies. Columbia borrowed stars. These are some of the stars they borrowed. Actors, Clark Gable. Okay, he was a famous actor in some of these movies. Okay. Also, as far as Columbia having temporary directors, Frank Capra, that he's a really popular one. So is John Ford. Okay. Okay, United Artists. They slow decline in film business. D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks retired. Charles Chaplin released one feature film every 5 years. So they had a sort of slow starting, okay, and they were one of the small 3s. Okay. And from 1930 to 45, United Artists were known for specializing in slapstick comedies, okay, musicals, British imports, okay, and they didn't do any westerns. Okay. United Artists didn't do any westerns. Everybody jumped into that. Why do you think? Yeah.
Because, I mean, more recently, the West had started getting developed, like
Okay.
earlier on in the 1900s.
Okay, good. That's a good point. Anybody else? Well, it's because the U.S., we're the one who actually created this genre. Okay, the westerns came from the U.S. I mean, there are other countries doing different genres, but we're the one who created this western genre. It's still popular, you know. I think my last favorite genre is Unforgiven. Anybody watch that?
Yes.
Clint Eastwood.
Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, it's one of my favorite. I thoroughly enjoyed it. True Grit was a remake of an original one. And that was okay. If you watched the original, I think you would really enjoy True Grit, the original with John Wayne. It was just a different flavor.
So which one do you like more?
Jeff Bridges right away.
John Wayne, I think for me, only because he had such a presence, and this particular character kind of really expressed who he was. A lot of times, I don't know if you noticed, sometimes, when you see an A-list actor on a movie, it may deplete, it may lower the value of that movie because of this actor, because of maybe what he or she said about certain political things. So that's why a lot of the studio systems and attorneys, they always tell their actors and their clients, hey, don't say nothing out there, because most people won't agree with it. And it's true. Most of us don't agree with, what their point of view is. All right, independence, okay? Super low budget. They're called independent films, okay? And they target specific ethnic groups, okay? Usually either the black cast films, okay? If it's a black movie director, he would just cast a whole movie with black actors, or Yiddish, okay? Jewish films, same thing. If it's a Jewish director, he would just cast a particular actors who spoke Yiddish or Jewish, okay? All right, so it's almost impossible to break from the indie level. Why? Why is it hard to break from an indie level to a studio system? Yes?
Because it's like a target audience. It's not like it's meant for a certain
Okay.
like group of people.
For the budget?
The budget is really the big thing. Like I mentioned, they have deep pockets. Okay, could we compete even with a production company? If you right now you're writing your script, and maybe maybe next week we'll talk about it. Hopefully you guys are still working on it. You have a great idea. You have a wonderful sort of story and everything. How can you actually now green light it and start shooting it? It's really, really expensive. Even with today's technologies, with it being cheaper on cameras. Back then, maybe about 10, 20 years ago, you would have to rent or buy a camera for film. And some of these cameras are like $200,000, $300,000. Okay, and to rent them, it's going to cost between $20,000 to $30,000 for your, duration of your film. So it's very expensive. So it's really difficult for them to kind of break into the level of studio system. But there was a so-called secure, stable environment, okay, and working with one another. So they loan stars out to play each other's theaters. These are the big studio systems. They played out, So Warner Brothers would say, hey, Columbia, or another big studio said, hey, could you go ahead and allow me to play out, your movies? And so there's a lot of bartering. And so they kind of didn't allow the others to kind of catch up with them. Okay. They also worked with the MPPDA to fight outside pressure for censorship of movies. Okay. The end. Okay, how many minutes do we have left?